after, I can do a recap. So we're going to let Jessica Reynolds get started here. So take it away, Jessica.
Okay. Well, I thought I knew exactly what I was going to talk about, but so many different things have come up today, I kind of don't know where to go with it. If you look this way, I want you to take a look at the person on the left. That was me 4 years ago. Now, exactly. It isn't just that big belly and that I'm 309 pounds. Look at my face.
Yeah, you didn't look happy.
Yeah, I think I was actually trying in that picture too to look happy. Yeah, that was a pretty low. I think I gained about 15 pounds after that. We took that picture because somebody's like, "Why do you even have that?" I'm like, "Well, we took that picture because I was going to start a diet, and I'd failed by the next day, so I wound up gaining 15 more pounds after that." I use that picture for attention because people do get a reaction, right? But that's not the story. The story is not about the weight loss. The story is about a transformation, spiritual, physical, mental transformation. And I always just say, if I didn't put the picture, no one ever reads what I write. So it helps me get the attention because I did lose weight also. I was food addicted or obsessed with food in some kind of way since I was a very young child. I can't go into all the details because of time, but I will say this. I became bulimic at age 11. I started binging and purging, and there's been a lot of talk about where that comes from. Now, when I was a kid, I was very sheltered. My parents were strict. I didn't have access to fashion magazines. We didn't have a TV most of my childhood. There was no media influence, and people think that's what eating disorders are all about. For me, what I had figured out is that it was a way for me to push down feelings. And I had been doing that way before age 11. In fact, as long as I can remember, what I was using food for was soothing and comfort. If I was anxious, if I was angry, if I was upset, I would eat, and it felt like that emotion, that anxiety that was rising up in me would be pushed down. And I'd feel relief for a little while. And then, of course, when I discovered bulimia, I didn't know that's what it was. I thought I just came up with this new thing to do. I would purge, and it would give me some temporary relief. Like I was literally addicted to the relief that it gave me, pushing it down, releasing it. So I did that for many years. It was a secret in my family. When my parents finally found out, they did try to get help for me. I went to 5-6 different hospitals. I've had so many therapists, I can't count them. Like everybody else here, I've done every diet, because that's what it really comes down to. Like, how does keto tie into this, right? I did every diet, including Atkins, and I was very good at losing weight. I went through bouts of anorexia also. At one point I was 115, and another point I was 309. So it was this out of control relationship with food. And I told you a little bit this morning about me, but I never expected to be speaking about these things. They were things that were so private and so shameful that I could never imagine anything good could come from it. And that's the message today, is that anything in your life that has caused you pain can be redeemed in some kind of way. And I'm actually at the part of my life with gratitude that I wouldn't take anything back that I went through. In fact, I'm grateful because it made me who I am. I went through a terrible time with depression, with bulimia. Bulimia is, a lot of people aren't familiar with that, but a lot, or just think of binging and purging. Bulimia is anything that you do to try to undo a food decision that you made. So you can have a bulimic mindset and say, well, I ate way too much, so I'm going to fast for days and days. Or you can say, I'm going to eat a lot today, But then I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do this amount of activity. Any attempt to undo an eating decision is really bulimic mentality. I struggle with addiction to taking laxatives because I would binge eat and I would take laxatives, and I really messed my system up. I married Mike when I was very young, and he's been here through all of it, so I always like to give him credit. He's quiet, but he's been here through all of it. So throughout my young adulthood, my eating disorder got worse and worse. It is progressive, and there are many times that I would binge or I would purge many times a day. I also just couldn't get away from feeling like I needed food for comfort. I went to 12-step programs, and they are terrific things. They did not help me. And I like to talk about that because me going to 12-step programs when I had this problem, what I had was an identity problem. I believed that my identity was sickness, that the sickness was who I was. If something is a part of who you are, how can you get rid of it? Right? And so when I would go into 12-step programs, I would say, I'm Jessica, I'm bulimic, and bulimia was who I was. It's like saying, I'm Jessica, I have a leg. The only way to get rid of it is to cut it off. But it put me in a place of acceptance about the eating disorder, but it didn't cure me. And in fact, I became very comfortable with the title. Jessica has an eating disorder. I could talk about it. Like, I was less shameful about it. I still hid the things I did. I didn't go into detail. But it became part of who I thought I was. I was sick. I was bulimic. And that's why that sort of program didn't work for me. And again, I did all the diets. I went to every therapist. And no one ever really helped. I was 41. And I had gone through a lot of horrific depression, anxiety, suicide attempts. I convinced myself of the lie that my family might hurt if I killed myself, but it wouldn't hurt them as bad as my presence did. I felt like I was a drain. I was on 17 pills a day. I was on them for bipolar. I was on for anxiety, depression, insomnia, bladder disease, migraine. I'm sure I forgot something. Yell it out, honey, if I did. Anyway, the only way I was functioning in life was by taking pills that turned me into a zombie. And I had even gotten to the point where my doctor said to me, pills don't work for you anymore. You've been taking them since you were 16. You're taking there's nothing else to try. The only thing that we can do for you is electric shock therapy. Some of you guys may not even realize that still exists. I'm a strong advocate against it today. I have a page where I talk about how no one should have it. You can't make an informed consent about something like that when you're at the place that you need it. For me, I had 12 treatments, and not only did it not fix me, I lost huge chunks of my life. I had pretty severe memory loss. Mike and I went to Jamaica in 2013, apparently. I mean, it's that big. Like, there's zero memory of that. If I was in court and swearing on someone's life, on a Bible, whatever, I would say, I've never been there. And then you show me a picture of me there. And it's the most bizarre thing. And so I dealt with a lot of guilt that I had made that decision. And I was just a wreck. And that added to not wanting to go out in public anymore. For about 5 years, I just gave in. The main thing I want to talk about today is the lies that we believe that keep us in destructive patterns. And the lie that I believed at that moment was, this is just who I am. My best days are over, and this is how my life's going to be till I die. And honestly, I didn't care if I died because my quality of life was that low. And I felt like a burden. But that was the lie I believed. And the voice of sabotage that we all have, and we all have one, said to me, I call mine Ed because it's short for eating disorder. The voice of sabotage said to me, Jessica, the reason you're so miserable is because you've been fighting this so long. Like, why do you keep fighting? Why do you keep going to different therapists? Why do you keep trying? Why do you go to these meetings? Why do you try? And I thought, yes, the only way I'm ever going to get peace is to give up the fight, right? And that was the biggest lie. That was the second biggest lie, I believe. The first one was that I wasn't worth anything and that I was better off dead. The second one was, if you give in to the thing that you're fighting against, that you'll get peace, because no resistance. The lie there was the fact that, or the omission was that this sort of thing is progressive. You don't just stay where you are. I literally was like, okay, I'm gonna be sick, I'm gonna be fat, people know I have an eating disorder, don't care, not gonna leave the house, I'm here till I die. Because that seemed easier than fighting, but the problem is I got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Until I really just ceased to exist. I wasn't on social media. Literally, like, it's like I fell off the face of the earth. As you can imagine, during that time, I was not capable of being a good parent or a good wife or a good daughter or anything. I was just alive. So that went on for 5 years, and it finally got to the point where, again, I wasn't leaving the house, and it wasn't just not going and doing social things. Like, I wouldn't walk outside. There was a point where we talked and realized that I hadn't walked outside to feel the sun on my face in 5 months. I wouldn't walk to the mailbox, partially for I felt so unworthy and so disgusting that no one should have to see me. Like, oh, how terrible to make people look at me when I am the way I am, and I'm so miserable. My presence was just so heavy. I felt like it was a burden to the world, even people that didn't know me. I was afraid my neighbor would turn around and look at me if I went to the mailbox. I thought, he doesn't deserve that. That's how I felt about myself, completely worthless. I also had given up a career. I had a really successful career at one point, and I loved my job, and I was making a lot of money. In fact, Mike stayed home with Clara, and I worked because it was terrific income, and it was a job I was good at in the corporate world. I walked away from that. Literally, I was like, I had a nervous breakdown. After being in that world for 16 years, I just completely walked away. And I kind of thought when that happened that, well, if I get out from under the stress of my job, if I get out from under the stress of performance, if I get out from under the stress of being the breadwinner for the family, if I get out from under that stress, some of this will lighten up. And it was the very first day that I was home after I left that job, I realized it was inside of me. The stress had nothing to do with my external environment. I carried it around. So that kind of brings us to the point where I was, again, I don't know that I was suicidal. I just didn't care if I died. I used to wish something would happen to me, and that way I wouldn't have to feel bad about taking my own life. But I got to the point that health-wise, and I don't even know what all my issues were health-wise, because I had stopped going to the doctor. I didn't want to be weighed. I didn't want anybody to chastise me about my weight. When I would lay in bed at night, the weight of my own chest would be crushing, and I would wake up and I would gasp for air. And if I tried to go upstairs, or if I even had any strong emotion, like a laugh or something like that, I would black out. Like something major was going on with my body. And that's when Mike finally said to me, "You're gonna die, and I don't want you to die." And he talked me into going and getting my blood pressure taken. And when they took it, it was way up in the hypertension risk for stroke, like any second. And it was interesting because you would think I would know that, the way that I treated my body and the way that I was eating, the way that I, was inactive. You would think, but I didn't. I never really thought about health. I just didn't care about it. But when I saw that, all of a sudden I had this realization, and I pictured myself in the future, and I was either in a wheelchair disfigured from a stroke at my daughter's wedding, or I wasn't there. And I like to say my life didn't flash before my eyes. I didn't look back. I started to think about, I do want to be here. How did I get caught up in this lie that I was better off gone? I don't want to miss those things. I don't want to miss my children's lives. I don't want my husband to get a new wife. So I was so entrapped in this lie that that's who I was, and I was just, that I could not change. That was the lie. And that's why I have to talk about it today. Anybody can change. The things that I went through to change who I am, to transform on keto, I realized apply to every single other area of your life. Everything. There's no sabotaging pattern in your life that you can't change. And I'm just gonna walk you through that. You help me on time because I'll go on that. So how did keto help? Well, I went through the health scare, and again, this is when I'm a big personality in our household. Mike's really chill, and we balance well that way. But this is one time where he said to me, we have to do something. And I had remembered that I had lost weight on Atkins in the past. I lost 80 pounds on Atkins. But it didn't make me any better. I was still binging and purging and doing all the harmful behaviors. But I was like, hey, that's probably the fastest thing we can do, go back on Atkins. And so that night, I remember the first meal I ate was a 30-piece chicken nuggets from Chick-fil-A, which is like now, like that sounds so horrific, but that's how little I knew about low carb, and that's how little I knew about keto. I just knew that there was one carb each in each one of those things. So the first step towards freedom was something most people would say, no, like if you were in a keto group and posted, I'm so excited, I just had my first keto meal, it's a 30-piece, everybody would rip. No, you guys know, everybody would rip you to shreds. And I think it's so important for people who haven't started, if you're considering starting, that tiny first step. And I was proud of myself, because it wasn't Ben and Jerry's, and it wasn't Papa John's, and it wasn't all the other things. And in those first weeks, what I knew about keto was sort of my background with Atkins. It was just low carb. But we started to eat it consistently. I needed a ton of food. You can look at me. I needed a ton of food to function at all. I was used to eating a ton of food. I simply just said, I'm gonna eat this, not this. There was no macros. There was no counting. I had no idea what I was doing, none. So I got back on social media because Mike says, well, there's all these low carb groups on Facebook now. Now there are a ton. 4 years ago, there was a couple. But I thought, well, I'll get some recipes. It'll be more interesting. But he added me to a group called Ketogenic Success. Great. The rest is history. And I was still at home. I wasn't leaving, so I wasn't driving. I wasn't doing any of those things. The only thing I had changed was I was eating a ton of low carb food versus a ton of garbage food. And I started to realize, it was a smaller group at the time, and so each post was really, really important. But I started to realize there was something different here. Like, this is not just low carb. This is something different. People's transformations seem different. And I realized two different things. One, keto is a high-fat diet. Two, ingredients matter. Those are two things I never would have considered in my life. Remember I said I did every diet? I never did high-fat. I did high-fat, high-carb, which is the standard American diet. But I could not fathom the idea of putting fat on my food. I'm 45 years old, and I grew up in that fat is bad. As long as something's low fat, you eat it. You can eat all you want of it. Doesn't matter, all the sugar and stuff. So it was so hard. I really had to take a leap of faith. when things really started to change for me. So I was taking one day at a time, one meal at a time, and instead of eating this, I was eating this. It was simply that. That's how I started off my ketogenic lifestyle. Instead of eating all the carbs, I was eating a ridiculous amount of food. But it was a change that I needed, and my brain started to clear up. Started to be able to think a little bit clearer. And I'm like, why is this different? Why do I feel different than I've ever felt on any other diet? And I realized that the ingredients part of it was so important, because there are certain foods that create conditions for inflammation in your body. And guess what? That means inflammation in your brain too. So as I understood, wheat is part of the problem here. Grains are part of the problem. Sugar is the problem no matter what you call it. Whether it is fructose or dextrose or maltodextrin, it's sugar. I started to understand that, and because I was starting to feel better, I was obsessed with what is this? What is a ketogenic lifestyle? Why do I feel better when I've never felt better in my life? Nothing's ever lasted. Short times in rehab, I would get clean, meaning you couldn't purge. They were with you 24/7, and they would give you low-fat, tasteless food. So it was sort of like, well, just you lose your taste for food if we don't give you salt or seasonings or any fat or anything like that. It worked temporarily. It got the sugar and stuff out of my system. I would come out clean and thinking a little bit clearly. But the problem is, in all the eating disorder hospitals, with every therapist I ever had, we were taught, when you're well, you can eat anything in moderation. Wellness equals moderation, right? Well, here's the thing, and this is why I was able to change, and this is what came to me as I got the brain clearing effect of keto. I am addicted to this stuff. Not only am I addicted to the sugar, not only am I addicted to the carbs, I'm addicted to pushing down every emotion that I don't want to feel. I'm addicted to this process. Why am I treating addiction like you can treat it with moderation? How did I know I was addicted? I couldn't stop doing it. If you're someone that has tremendous success, willpower in a million areas of your life, but you just feel like food is this one thing you can't get your arms around, you probably have a food addiction, right? And we try, because we tend to be type A personalities, people that are all or nothing. We want to be great at anything that we do. And so, we feel like we should be able to muscle our way into wellness. And the problem is, moderation doesn't work if you're an addict. And fully removing the sugar, the grains, those inflammatory things from my diet, I had mental clarity like I had never experienced in my life. I think there were times I thought that I was clear before, but this was different. I was putting things together. I think it was on Robert's podcast, I said, it was like all the therapists I ever had held hands, and it all linked up, and I got it because my brain could accept it. I had gotten some good advice here and there. I had heard things that made sense. They didn't apply to me. Finally, I was like, I can apply this to me with the change that I got to treat this as an addiction. This is not something that I can do as a moderator. That's a hard pill to swallow. I lead eating disorder groups, and that's one of the toughest things, acceptance. There are people who are moderators, and there are people who aren't. There are people who, they can start in moderation, and it always accelerates into a fall. Maybe you're someone who has lost weight over and over and over again. Why? Because then you start to go back to the thing in moderation, and you go in that spiral. There's a whole bunch of us, and I say us because I assume at least one person in this room or somebody who's watching this, it deals with that. But for me, I had to accept, when it comes to food, my brain does not work the same way other people's does. I would see people pick up something really rich and chocolatey and take one bite and then put it down and be like, oh, that's so rich, I can't eat anymore. I'd be like, what does that mean? I don't even know what this is. How in the world? I had never experienced that. It was never too much. Danny talked about leptin and ghrelin, your hunger and full hormones. I didn't know about those then, but I used to say most I would say normal people have a switch that pops on when they're hungry and it turns off when they're full. I would say mine's burned out. And this was before I was well. I just realized something in there wasn't working like it's supposed to. Now I know my hormones were all out of whack. I had been a vegetarian for 14 years. This was back in the 90s and 2000s, and I ate tons of soy, stuff like that, and it really, really, really wrecked my hormones badly. Plus the lifestyle that I had was just damaging. But now I realize that, you know, if we ignore a signal from our body for long enough, it says, and it kind of gets latent. So those hormones, leptin and ghrelin, for me, I would ignore fullness, and I had done it since I was a kid. So there was no full. I mean, I could just keep going. I could eat twice as much as Mike, and he was not slim at the time. He was 60 pounds heavier. He wouldn't eat all his food. I would eat all his too. There was no full. I also had no idea what real hunger was. Because as a child, when I felt fear, I would eat. If I felt sad, I would eat. If I was super excited, I would eat to celebrate that. If I was lonely, I would eat. Every time I actually felt one of those emotions, loneliness, I would get a signal in my body that felt like actual hunger. You couldn't tell me it wasn't hunger. It felt like hunger feels. I had trained my body that when a fearful situation comes, the response is hunger, because then I'm going to soothe it with the food. Again, all these things kind of became clear to me after about 2 months on keto, and this is where the high fat thing comes in. So I was eating it. I had great faith in removing the ingredients. Let me just slide over because I'm melting. I had great faith that moving the ingredients made a huge difference. The inflammation was down. I couldn't buy into this idea of high fat. And I sort of got to the point where I just had to take a leap of faith. I saw other people that were eating this way and they were losing weight. I was already fat. I had to get to that point and say, why not try it? So I did. And one of the things I realized is that my brain turned on. I mean, it was like hyperactive brain. I suddenly was like, I want to drive again. I didn't have a driver's license just because I let it go. Like, I wanted to participate in life again. All the things I didn't want to do, I wanted to do. And the most important thing is I studied. I wanted to know why. And what I learned is that a ketogenic diet is so good for our brains. Our brains' preferred fuel is ketones. Our brains are mostly run on fat, but can run on glucose. There's only a very small amount of our brain that runs well on glucose. The rest, or that requires glucose. The rest optimally runs on fat. And I thought, my entire life I've never eaten fat. In fact, I avoided it. I had mental health issues, but this certainly exacerbated it. The avoidance of the fat. My brain was fat starved. It helped me forgive myself for the struggles that I went through. There was a physical reason why things were the way they were. So about 2 months in, I realized I haven't binged and purged. I would get out of rehab and maybe go a month, and then I would relapse because I'd be like, I can have a piece of a candy bar. After all, my therapist said that. But the piece would always lead to more every single time. So I decided to get what I call food sober. I was like, it's my sobriety. I'm going to treat this like an illness. And I understand that other people aren't like me. They don't have to do things the way I do. But I bet there are other people out there that are like me. You've tried and tried, and you've had success, and then you sabotage. And you're like, why? Why? Every other area of my life I can do something with. This, I keep sabotaging myself. Well, we're not treating it like it is the addiction, but it is. And it's addictive behavior, and it's addiction to food. I can binge on meat. I think somebody said earlier you can. I'm like, I can't. Because it really was that behavior of stuffing down, and I had taught my body that it could do that. And not everybody purges. Some people just binge eat. And I had gotten to the point I didn't even care. That's how I got fat. I didn't even care about purging. Who cares? I'm at home anyway, you know? I maintained with bulimia when I was in the business world, but once I was home, I was done. You could tell I just gave up. So I decided to research, but I also decided to start talking about what was going on. And I remember when I first started talking about it and saying, hey, I have an eating disorder and it's getting better. Well, 4 years ago, people aren't talking about eating disorders, not publicly. It's so shameful. You think you live this life as a fraud. I remember I would go and stand on the stage and talk to people about how to make their business successful and how to make their district or area as good as mine. And people would clap and they just thought the world of me. And then I would go to the hotel room after and order everything on the menu and binge and purge. It took so much of me to create that fake identity that I thought that people needed from me for me to feel good enough, that I was worn out. And I would just, that lifestyle lent itself to continuing to binge and purge. So I decided part of the reason I always feel so much shame and anxiety is because I feel like somebody might discover who I really am and not love me or like me, or they might not want to be my friend. They might be disgusted. I thought about the people, I'm like, if I put this out here, what about the people I used to work with? They won't think of me as that person up on the stage anymore. They'll think of me in the hotel, binging and purging. And so I finally came to the point that I said, this might be really, really, really embarrassing for me. Do you know what it took to share that picture? I never thought in a million years I would show that to anyone. It was just for me and Mike. Mike took the picture. But I said, people need to know there is hope. It does not matter what age you are. I was 41 at that time. It does not matter how long you have been sick. Here's something that might help you that you haven't tried. And the message was important enough for me to get over my shame. And I remember I probably sat there for 10 minutes with it up on the screen and this whole thing that I'd written out. And I was like, I felt sick, I felt nauseous. I thought about the people that were gonna see it. All these things went through my head, and I remember I hit post. And instead of feeling like devastated, I felt like a load was off me. It was like the greatest, most freeing feeling. It's like, you know what, I get to be authentic now. I don't have to spend any energy hiding because it's all out there. And if someone has something bad to say, it's either true, because I'm telling you myself, this is what I did. It's either true and I acknowledge it, or you don't know me and it's not true. So I was able to do that, and the response to the eating disorder part of it was huge. Again, I don't think anybody was talking about it at all then, but the food addiction, the eating disorder part really resonated. And then the depression part, I mean, I was suicidal. I was diagnosed bipolar and OCD. What else did I forget, honey? Like, just start yelling out mental illnesses. But I had, no, I mean, really, like, clinically diagnosed with these things. And yet, I didn't feel that way. My energy level was smooth. Why? I studied and I learned that when we're not depending on carbs to pick us up, crash, pick us up, crash, pick us up, crash, and our body knows to burn fat, we are carrying around a constant fuel source that makes us feel good. This is why I felt better. Not only was my brain not inflamed because I took out the stuff, but I was fat adapted. 2 months was the mark where I hit fat adaptation. And that's where my body knew exactly what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to burn fat, and it changed my whole world. I went down the rabbit hole of studying. I got my certification as a holistic nutritionist. I also got, I'm a certified cognitive behavioral therapist for eating disorders. So this literally like sent me on this path I never imagined I would go on. And I started off by saying, I want you to know that even the worst things in your life that you cannot imagine anything good could ever come from, there is not one thing that I can't point to that's helped somebody or brought someone a light that they needed to see. Part of my problem during that 5 years of absence from life was I stopped believing I had a purpose. When I was younger, I was raised a Christian, and I was shy about it. I wouldn't talk about it all the time, but I felt like in my world, in the business world, there were times people would come to me and it would come to that. It would come to talking about salvation and freedom. And I always felt like this is my real job. This is why I'm here. I'm in this job because I was supposed to meet this person. We were supposed to have this conversation. I lost that. I lost sight of that completely. In fact, I just believed my best days were over and nothing else of purpose would ever come from my life. And this quest for information, I love science, love it. Like I just read it like crazy, and I love how it fits into my beliefs. Science backs up the things I believe. But I became a person that I didn't know existed. I wasn't back to the old me before electric shock therapy. Those memories are gone. I grieved them. It makes me so sad when my little girl says, "Mommy, do you remember this and this and this?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, honey, I don't. That was during that time that Mommy wasn't well." I have to say that to her because I literally have no memory of things. And it's one entire year, a chunk of the one before it and the chunk of the one after it. But that's hard, and I was angry. I was really, really, really mad that anybody would do this to a person with the electric shock therapy. It's just really barbaric, and it's never worth it. It does not fix you. But I had hoped I could get back to me before that. But the reality is I transformed. Transformed didn't mean I went from fat to skinny or fat to normal. That's what I like to say about me, fat to normal. It meant I was transforming into something that I had never been before, I'd never seen before. And I started to realize I have never been the best version of me. I have never been the version of me that I was created to be. Why? Addiction. Those habits. That turned me down a path, and I was so far away from who I was meant to be. But in healing and working with the addiction, I started to come back here, and then I went somewhere else. This is not a path I saw. I'm like, this is so much better than what I imagined. The person you are meant to be is not scarred by behaviors that wreck you and that you keep repeating in your life. So I did want to really quick go through that process. I do teach intuitive eating classes. I know some of you guys are going to have questions about that because I actually teach intuitive eating classes, but I also teach food addiction, eating disorder classes, and I do one-on-one coaching. What I start with every single person is, my goal for you is to be free. They may come to me because they're like, well, if I get skinny, my life's going to be good. I say, well, listen, if you keep doing the right thing, you'll get to be the size you're meant to be. I don't know what size that's going to be. We're all created to be our own size. My goal is for you to have freedom in your thoughts, freedom with your food. And some people say, Jessica, do you have freedom with your food? Because you don't ever eat those things. And I say, absolutely. I am free because of science. I have studied and understood that sugar, grains, those kind of things, they cause inflammation in my body. I don't like what happens to me when I'm inflamed. That's what I look like as an inflamed person. Don't like it. I don't like how I feel when I'm inflamed. So I feel I have free will to choose any food in the world, but I no longer want to self-harm, so I don't want those things. Because people say, don't you ever cheat? Don't you ever take a break? I'm like, why? I would go back to that. You start doing the thing that you did that made you sick in the first place, and you're going to get sick again. There is no end to the journey. And again, some people are dismayed by that. And I'm like, this is what keeps life exciting, is that there's no end. You're always seeking the next level. You don't just hit a number. A lot of people fail because they think when they get to a certain number, they're going to feel a certain way, or then they're going to be happy, or some magical thing's going to happen. And what I have figured out from working with hundreds of clients is that a lot of times that number they're trying to get to is a number that was significant earlier in their life. Somebody gave me a compliment, or I was in love when I was at this number, or I was popular when I was this number. And they think when they get to that number, they're going to feel that way again, and they don't, and they relapse. They gain all the weight back, because what was the point? They still don't feel good. So again, freedom is sobriety for me. And you might think I might be the only person in the world. That's not true. Like I said, I've worked with a few hundred people over the last 3 years or so. And I had a client just this week, and it meant, I can't tell you what this meant to me. She's a former client. She texted me and she sent me her sobriety counter. What does food sobriety mean anyway? It means I haven't knowingly put anything in my body that would harm me. And I haven't binged, purged, done behaviors that I know are harmful for me with food. And she sent me her clock and said 1,000 days. And even if it was just her, it would make everything worth it. But there are so many people that have gotten free. All the time I get messages like, I'm free now. I'm so grateful, I'm so free. So how do you get free? The first step is just make a change. We talked a lot about scientific stuff. I love talking about plants, lectins, and all that stuff. But if you're in the beginning and you are bound by food, and you can't stop that cycle you're going through, you just need to say, I'm not going to eat this. I'm going to eat as much as I want to of this. Is that still binging? It might be. In my experience, you take one thing at a time. I'm getting the garbage out of my system. There's a great food list at www.ketoevangelist.com. You put in your email, you get the food list. It's one page. It's super simple. What I did was, I'm like, okay, I'm only going to eat foods on this list, but I'm going to eat as much as I need to. And I might be craving, chocolate, but instead I'm going to eat, another steak or a giant salad with a whole bottle of dressing. Yes, it sounds terrible, but that's some of the things I did in the beginning. So the first step is just getting mentally clear, getting the inflammatory or foods that make you prone to inflammation out of your life. Get rid of the sugar. And trade what you were eating for real food. That's the first step. The second step is you want to start to on the food list. It's got a list of all the foods that are really low carb, that don't have a huge effect on your blood glucose. And so you sort of know these are foods I can have. But when I figured out this high fat aspect, and I spoke to that when somebody asked a question about vegetables, I figured out I can have any of these vegetables. Yes, they're carbs, but what satisfies me is fat. How do I make my protein, and yes, there is a minimum amount of protein, and it changes throughout your keto journey. I lost 135 pounds at 85% fat. I know that because I go back now. Like, I never tracked the whole time, but I can go back and put in the stuff, like exactly what I ate, 85, 90% fat. Because there are days I would eat 0 carbs and just tons and tons of fat and butter. Do not fall for the lie that you will not burn your body fat if you're eating fat. That would be impossible. Like, my story would be impossible because I ate so much fat really the first year and a half. Now I'm almost equal. Like, I'll eat, like, there are many times I don't add fat to things. I eat a fatty steak. Your journey changes as you go. Some people get frustrated because they are doing a certain thing and it stops working. No, your body changed and you need to adjust. What worked for you then doesn't work for you now. So I experiment with days that carbs are a little higher. I experiment with much higher protein. I experiment with not adding fat. I think that's part of what keeps the journey interesting. I mean, I might lose more weight, but I had to come to peace with there is a size that my body's meant to be. And I really messed with that for 3 decades. If I continue every day, every time there's an eating decision to be made, if I continue to make the right decision each time, I'm gonna heal and I will eventually be there. And I have found that to be true. Now it's been over 4 years, but once you're feeling better, once you get that junk out of your system, you can't even begin to work on your disordered behaviors. You cannot work on your sabotaging behaviors when your brain is inflamed and it's not getting the source of fuel that it needs. That's why I never got better. I did have some great therapists. Actually did. They didn't know about eating disorders, but they did know about a lot of things. So the next part that we talk about is deciding if you are someone who has a food addiction, or if food takes a way too much time in your life. How much brain energy is food for you? Freedom is not thinking about food all the time. Freedom is living your life with food in the background. You get hungry and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna eat. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying your food. I'm not one of those people, I know food is fuel, but we also were created with these amazing taste buds. Yeah. So it's fuel that we're meant to enjoy. The problem is when we use it for something other than nourishment. We use it to calm our fears. We use it to be a partner when we're lonely. So once you get all that stuff out of your system, you can start to think about why you do what you do. And again, like I said, I've been able to apply this to more than just my eating disorder. So first thing I realized is I have a voice of sabotage in my head. And those of you who don't have it or don't know it, you will be like, Jessica is crazy. But everybody who actually has this, which is a whole lot of people, they are like, oh. So I realized that if my brain, I had this brain, and I knew, I'm fairly smart. I know what I want. I want to be well. I want to be productive. I want to be an inspiration. Why then do I do the opposite thing? Why? Because there is an influence there. I call the voice Ed, again, short for eating disorder, Ed. So what does Ed do? Ed waits for a moment when you are vulnerable, and he tells you a lie. So one of the things that I do with people first is say, recognize Ed in your life. What are the moments when you were determined to do something and then you stopped, even if it's not about food? Like what were the times that you knew something was right and you wanted it with everything, yet you found yourself doing the opposite? What was the process? How did that happen? And the answer is you believed a lie. Remember I said the second biggest lie I believed was that I would have peace if I gave up the struggle? That was Ed, big time. The worst thing Ed does is he talks to in your own voice. Like we all have internal dialogue going on all the time, but we think we're talking to ourselves. Like I would say things like, well, I thought about it and I decided I'm taking the day off. Or I'm like in diets in the past, or I've been thinking about it and I decided that's not really what I want. No, that is a negative influence, the voice of sabotage, the enemy. So Ed is there to plant a thought. And the first thing that I realized is there are times that we're all more vulnerable to a sabotaging thought. For me, and for most people I work with, if they get too hungry, if they get too angry or anxious, if they get too lonely, or they get too tired, they're extra vulnerable to a sabotaging thought. And so the first thing that you have to do is be aware of what your danger zones are. Your danger zone might be at night. You turn on the TV and automatically you get that signal to eat. When you're alone or you're lonely, it pops up, the signal to eat. Why? I believe Ed is the opposite of purpose. We all have a purpose that we are meant, that we're created for. I think science backs that up. We all have individual fingerprints. Why? It's to show us, you're not like me, I'm not like you. Like science, we have physical evidence we're created for purpose. And so the enemy of purpose is Ed. And you don't have to call it Ed, by the way. People have come up with some pretty funny things that they call that. But realizing that it's there, those times that you have started something that you know is the right thing and that would heal you, and then you sabotage, that wasn't self-sabotage, that was Ed sabotage. And it's really, really important to realize that in the moment, remember I said I have to take one meal at a time, one day at a time, one step at a time, and make a good decision? There's a decision to be made. So I'm not sabotaging myself, but Ed will plant the thought in my Jessica voice over here. You know, once you're alone, you could eat that and nobody would know. I bet your metabolism's fixed now. You've been keto a long time, you could eat that. And I have a decision to make. Because usually Ed's lies might have a nugget of truth in them. They always sound really good. They sound convincing because they have a nugget of truth. What he does is he omits everything else that happens. So how do you, once you identify the lie, I know I'm in a danger zone, I'm alone. What's the lie? The lie is that I can eat this and get away with it. No one will know. And the way to address that is acknowledge it. So one of the things that I failed at in the past, one of the things I really struggled with is I would realize I was having a sabotaging thought and I would try to push it away. I'm like, nope, not thinking that. Nope, that does not work. You get worn out. That voice of sabotage will repeat, and it won't get tired. You will, and it will win. You will give in to what that is. But if you acknowledge, I literally encourage people to start, especially in the beginning, say it out loud. Ed, I hear you telling me I could get away with this. You confront that thought, you capture the thought, and you confront it with truth. So if Ed tells me, Jessica, you've been free for 4 years, I bet you're not addicted anymore, I bet you wouldn't purge. I say, Ed, many times I believed that lie, and I always went back. I'm not even gonna give you an inch. I'm not gonna take the tiniest chance. On top of that, I know the things you want me to eat will kill me physically. Again, science helps me with the decision. I don't wanna eat sugar. It's gonna give me an early death. It's gonna give me heart disease. It's gonna create all these conditions for disease. I stand up to Ed with facts about my history, or, oh Ed, you've said that to me before and this is what happened. You have to stand up with the truth to that tempting lie. And Ed's lies, some of you guys will notice, recognize these. Ed says oh, it'll just be one bite. Or just eat it tonight and then you won't have it tomorrow. Who said that? Was that me? Okay, so you said that and I was like, oh my gosh, that's Ed. So Ed says, eat it all tonight and then it won't be around tomorrow. And when Ed says that to me now, because even he'll say it to me with keto foods, I'll say, Ed, I am grown, I got a car, I can get in the store, and drive to the store and get more. Me getting rid of what's here is not going to be an obstacle for me in doing it again tomorrow. And in fact, if I eat this, my craving's going to be turned on and I'm more likely to do it tomorrow. If I don't have resolve now when it's not in my system, once it is, I'm definitely not. So basically those are the steps. You make a food change. You accept that maybe you're wired a little bit differently when it comes to food, so you have to handle this as an addiction. Then you realize there are times that you're more likely to be sabotaged, and then that there is a lie. There's always a lie you believe before you make the decision to sabotage. And you can stand up. If you stand up in truth each time you confront Ed, or each time you identify the lie, you literally can make one good decision at a time. Ed will try to hang forever over your head. He'll say, you can never keep this up forever. Look at all the times you got clean before. You can never do this. And to that I say, Ed, I don't have to worry about forever. All I have to do is make a good decision right now. I don't know anything about tomorrow or the next day or the next day. All I know is right now, I'm gonna make a good decision. And you do that over and over and over again. And then after 4 years, you can confidently say, I will never put something into my body that I know will harm me. I won't do it on purpose. I feel like I can say that now, but I couldn't for a long time. It was just one moment at a time. So you get to years of sobriety, one moment at a time, one eating decision at a time. I would encourage you, if you have had success in the past in any area of your life, and then you did something and you sabotaged it and you went backwards? Think about what's the lie that you believed and really confront that and say, okay, what was the truth? Like I said, I believed the lie that my best days were over, and it kept me just stuck and paralyzed for years. Sometimes fear comes up in me, and I know that's the voice of sabotage. And I have a tattoo on my back that says, fear the liar. Because it is. Fear is meant to paralyze you and keep you from moving forward in your purpose. Bottom line. And there's no one else that can fulfill that.
A good example of that I hear over and over and over again from clients, and I'm sure many of you sitting in here I know I've struggled with this, is literally the fear of missing out.
Yes.
Like how many times somebody will say to me, but you don't understand, they had this in the break room, and everybody, why do they all get to eat that? And I can't.
You can get used to, because here's the cool thing about Ed, he uses the same lies on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear it and I'm like, ooh, that's familiar. There's always a truth, right? So the fear of missing out, when Ed says, you're missing out on chocolate pie, the first thing I'll say is, I've had chocolate pie before, I've never had freedom before. The second thing that I'll say is, no, I'm missing out on diabetes. I'm missing out on obesity. I'm missing out on 17 pills a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Missing out on bloating.
Right. So you can kind of throw it back in his face, right? When he says you're missing out, when he says you deserve this, you say, I deserve health. I deserve to see what the best version of me looks like, and I've not met her yet. You just turn it around. And when you stand up in the truth, you will win every single time against the sabotage. And again, it isn't, I've applied it to other areas of my life now. That's what's so cool. Like, I'm like, food, I got it. Yeah. Like, Ed is slapped down. Where else in my life do I sabotage? What else do I believe that's a lie? This is about untangling lies you believe. And again, one of the things that I say a lot of times, because Ed will try to say, but you always fill in the blank. You always do this, but this is what you've always done. And I literally will sit there. When I need time, I go in the office away from the family and I shut the door. And I will sit there and I will deal with it. And I'll say, I am not who I was. I am someone else. And I don't do that. Because again, one of the biggest lies is that you have to do the things you've always done. And you don't. It does not matter how long you've done them. You can change. You literally can. I am proof of that. And there are so many others now that are proof of that, that this works. And again, I sort of condensed everything as well as I could, but that's my story. On Facebook and Instagram, I'm Coach Jessica. It's Coach and then JESSYCA. I do coaching through KetoEvangelistCoaching.com, but I have a surprise for you guys. You don't have to take me up on it. In each one of your swag bags is a coupon, a certificate for a 1-hour coaching session with me. If you want me, listen, I didn't talk about this. I didn't talk about this, but like I'm really good at calculating macros. Like, I'm good at helping people lose weight. I mean, if that's what you care about, I can do that for you. But I'd rather you go to someone that likes to do that stuff. So I don't mind doing that if that's what you want to use your hour for. But I'm more than happy to talk about what are the damaging influences in your life and how you can start to change. And I can help you find your danger zones. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you think it's all a blur and there's no process to your relapses or to your binges. There is. So anyway, that's however many hours of my time, but I felt so compelled to do this for this group. I've never done that before. So I have how you can get in touch with me on there. And again, you don't have to do it. It's not saying, hey, everybody needs me, but some people need me. And it's a little bit different than what you think about when you think about someone who coaches nutrition. The nutrition's like, I can tell you what to do. That's the easy part. Changing your behaviors. That's what I do. Breaking cycles.
That's the
learning
hardest
the
part.
truth. yeah, about
That is
yourself.
correct.
So, okay, I'm done.
Anybody have a question for Jessica that they want to answer before we move into, we're going to do a quick little break, and then I'm actually going to really quickly do a cooking demo thing, and then we'll just do like Q&A, like everybody, and then we'll eat, and then we'll do a little more talk, and then you guys can just go. So, any questions you have for Jessica?
I can speak about numbers obsession, anorexia, bulimia, compulsive overeating, binge eating. I can speak about intuitive eating. I can speak about epilepsy. I can speak about keto for your kids. Any of those things that you have heard, just like little, there's so much to talk about. I thought I was going to go one way, and then after being with you guys today, I decided to go a different direction. So a lot of things I didn't get to say.
This might be the dumbest question.
No, I'm sure
No
not.
dumb questions.
I've heard this term several times, and I have no idea what people are referring to. Intuitive eating.
Okay.
What does that
Yes,
mean?
so
Great.
it means different things in different circles. I guess it's good to say it's intuitive keto.
Okay.
So one of the words, like if I could like rip the internet apart and like rip one word off of it and like stomp on it and mash it, it would be lazy keto. Because there is nothing lazy about changing your entire life, changing what you've eaten your entire life. Nothing lazy about that. Intuitive keto simply means I don't track my macros. It isn't dirty. I hate dirty keto too, because it's either keto or it's not. But lazy keto is like just one of those words that like it paints a picture of something that isn't there. You have to work really hard. In fact, you have to work harder when you don't have a guide. The reason I didn't track was because this had to be different for me. It could not be another diet. I tracked a million times. I tracked a million diets. I have clients who track. They don't have the same issues I have. It's a tool. It can be a really good tool. It helps me learn things about people, but some people need the freedom from numbers obsession, and that is one of them. So intuitive keto for me is learning to eat what your body needs, and that means you also have to address when is it emotional hunger. You have to deal with what is your triggers, what are your danger zones, because again, if you've always felt hungry when you were lonely, then you're going to think you're hungry a lot more than you actually are. So keto takes higher fat keto takes care of a lot of that real hunger, but the emotional hunger feels the same. So helping you identify what are your danger zones? When is it that you feel hungry that's not hunger? Because if you are, I'm telling you, tiredness is one of the biggest ones. Mm-hmm. If you are tired, food is not going to fix it. Only rest will. If you are lonely, food's not going to fix it. It'll slide up next to you and say, hey. But if you're lonely, only connection with another person, with someone else, only connection will fix that. So you have to figure out what the real issue is. And you use food as a blanket thing to solve all those things before. You start to realize it doesn't work anyway. I needed food to satisfy hunger. I need sleep to satisfy tiredness. I need a plan, and I need to know the truth to satisfy anxiety.
Did I lie? She's a genius, huh?
So anything else?
Thank you.